Yvonne, Emily Drury from Nasdaq here at the Open Cloud Summit. I'm so excited to sit down with Yvonne Wassenaar, CEO of Puppet. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Absolutely excited to be here.
We have a lot to talk about. So first and foremost, share a little background on your company, and for our viewers who may be less familiar with open source and cloud infrastructure, software companies, what's one thing your company enables day-to-day people to do?
Absolutely. I like to say what Puppet does is we eliminate soul-crushing work. And our founder was a sysadmin. And so if you think about how annoying it is, like when you get all the software updates on your phone, like imagine if you had a data center and you had hundreds of thousands of servers and network devices and firewalls, and you had to manually configure those all the time. What Puppet fundamentally does is we automate all that with software. So we take out all that repetitive work, and we've extended into things like vulnerability remediation to keep you safe and secure. But if I were going to tell you the coolest thing that I recently learned that Puppet does is we run the technology on the International Space Station, which I love space, so that's one of my favorites. We also work with CERN on one of their telescopes and what they discover out in space. So
that's incredible stuff. And super useful, obviously. Yeah. So talk a little bit about the market opportunity your company is pursuing.
I like to say the market's big and getting bigger, which is a good spot to be in as a CEO. The configuration management market, which is what I talked about when you're managing servers and network devices, is supposed to be about $8 billion in 2022. But what's super exciting is that the public cloud and cloud native have really driven a whole transformation in the enterprise that benefits from something called DevOps and DevOps tools. And so what Puppet has done over the course of many years is to evolve from configuration management into an action platform across these multi-cloud environments that has different use cases. So there's continuous delivery, there's incident remediation, there's compliance reporting. So we've gone from configuration management across. And the DevOps marketplace is closer to 38 billion. So excited about that.
A lot of opportunity there for growth, for sure.
Absolutely.
So we're obviously here at the Open Cloud Summit, which is really exciting. And we're talking about how open source and cloud native infrastructure software, how it's reshaping modern IT stacks. So what inning are we in terms of adoption here?
I separate out open source and cloud native a little bit. One, because they're different. Open source is a way of developing technology, and cloud native is a certain type of technology. And they're at different stages of maturity. So if I take open source first, I like to say we're at the bottom of the third. And the reason for that is, in the early days when Puppet was founded many, many years ago, open source was developed as a big project. Everything was open and free. Contributors helped build it. And then companies used it, and they somewhat thought it was free. Now what happens is, whether it's open source or commercial technology, it's still technology. It still needs to be updated, patched. It can still, kind of morph into crazy things in your environment. And so the second inning was not so good. It was a lot of pain around how do you monetize an open source business model, and as a company, how do you keep this stuff working? Right. Particularly because some of the engineers who put it in move on, and you're responsible for support and everything else. The good news in open source, I think we're in the third inning. We've done well. We've figured out how to do other types of open source development, contributing to upstream project, in our case, like TechTime, which is founded by Google. There are foundations that support it. We stitch together different pieces of open source to create commercial product. So we've gotten smarter as a business, and the consumers of open source have also gotten smarter on how they use open source in pockets. But if you're a large enterprise, you're most likely starting to think about infrastructure automation as something that you want to have work versus you want to be configuring and managing all the time yourself. And so we're seeing a much more sophisticated use of open source as well, which is really exciting. Cloud native, it's early days. I'd say it's the first inning. Wow. And that's really because we're still in the honeymoon period where everybody thinks containers and cloud natives are great. And it's definitely an undeniable technology that'll be part of the new stack. But I think we're just starting to figure out where the faults are and what the challenges are going to be. So my sense is we're going to go through a little bit of realism, and then again, similar to open source, we'll be on a much better third inning.
So third inning and first inning respectively, a long way to go until 9, but exciting progress along the way for sure.
Yeah, and super powerful. If you look at what both open source and cloud native have been able to do so far, it's hard to even imagine how much they'll be able to change the world going forward. It's super, super exciting.
Yeah, really exciting. You can't imagine what we might do next.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So how is the adoption of open source and cloud native technologies changing how people should think about cybersecurity?
I'm so glad you asked about security. Having been a CIO before, I think we are just starting to understand the importance of putting much more focus on this. There was a Forrester report that said 58% of enterprises have suffered a security breach in the last year, and 41% of those were driven by software vulnerabilities. If you turn that on open source, our friends over at Sneak recently did an open source security report. They found an 88% increase in application vulnerabilities over a 2-year period. 78% of those through indirect dependencies, meaning you're calling an open source package and that's what's vulnerable, but you've now inserted it into your ecosystem. 37% of developers don't do anything with security during the CI portion of development. And I think it's over 50% aren't scanning the container images in Docker. So there's a lot of potential risk. We've seen the median time from when a vulnerability is introduced into open source to it being fixed being about 2 years.
Wow.
And according to GitHub, 99% of enterprise software has some type of open source in it. So a little scary. The good news is we recently completed our DevOps survey, and what we found is companies that are maturing their DevOps processes are really building security in. So there's this new wave of what we call DevSecOps. And you're seeing more done between security and development teams on threat modeling, on integrating security tools into the development process, and then also in terms of just prioritizing security as part of the product backlog.
Absolutely. So I have a feeling security might be a piece of the answer to the next question I'm going to ask you, but what kind of advice do you have for the next generation of enterprise software CEOs and operators?
I'm going to surprise you here. I'm actually going to say diversity and inclusion. And I'll tell you why. A lot of it ties back to open source. If you think about open source and you think about what it's doing, it's really democratizing technology, and it's democratizing the creation of ideas. And so I believe we're going to see some of the best ideas coming out of non-traditional pockets. I believe the marketplace is moving super, super quickly, and to stay on top and in line, you have to have the most diverse thinking around the table. And to get the best talent, you don't want to be isolating yourself to just a certain segment. You want the entire talent pool. The reason I add inclusion on there is the only way that you keep diversity is if you let people really impact at their true potential level. And so to me, I think about diversity and inclusion, and I bring it up as a thing that founders should think about now, because at the end of the day, the sooner you think about it, the sooner you build that into your population and your culture, the easier it is as you scale, because particularly in the early days, you hire from your network, and your network typically looks and thinks like you. And so the more you can focus on diversity and inclusion early on, you get all the benefits as you scale. And I think the benefits from an agility standpoint, from creative thinking, from kind of fusion across industry as everything kind of melds together with software is going to be super important. But cybersecurity is the second.
also important. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it is. I agree that it is absolutely essential. So CEOs take note. Yvonne, thank you so much for sitting down with me today at the Open Cloud Summit. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Emily Drury from NASDAQ here again at the Open Cloud Summit, and thanks for watching.